Why hello, dear viewer. Have you ever wanted to poop so violently that it literally causes you to die? Me neither. What a horrible intro to this video that was. It's 2 a.m. here, my name is Becca, and this is Gamboge. One of the most unusual pigments in history, a substance so incredibly toxic that ingesting even a small amount will cause you to yourself to death. And somehow that's one of the least interesting things about it. But today we aren't just talking about Gamboge, we're making it in a paint, and then using that paint to make a lovely, highly toxic painting. Why? Well, because genuine Gamboge like this is nearly extinct. Nobody else is gonna do this except for me, so let's dive into this rare pigment and where it comes from and also where I got it, because it's a bit of a doozy. It all started in South Korea. Let me take this poison pigment hack, just contained. I was recently invited to present at the annual conference for the International Shamanism Academic Research Society, aka ISARS, in Seoul, South Korea. Don't ask me why they thought I was qualified, but I guess I'm officially academically published now, so that's super cool. And along with being one of the most fascinating experiences of my entire life, it also meant I got to get up close and personal with some of Korea's oldest art and the religious practices that went along with it. We'll get into that more later in the video, but suffice it to say, we will talk about what Gamboge has to do with Naruto, evil ghosts, unrequited love, and the grind set mindset. Now, I found this particular piece of Gamboge in Insadong Market in Seoul, in a traditional art shop with some distractingly muscly advertisements outside and a bunch of signs inside that said "Don't touch anything" in English. If you have ever seen American Tourists, I understand that we are the worst, and I'm sorry. So I walk into this traditional art shop, and along with a bunch of these powdered paint pigments, most of which are for watercolor, I see this bad boy. Not the glove, obviously. And when I asked the shop owner what they were, he was like, oh yeah, those are traditional pigments for shamanism. So I bought it for 57,000 won, just about $40 in USD. Also, please ignore the other one, major spoiler. And I brought them back to the good old US of A, where I was only mildly jet lagged from the 16-hour time difference, and I was now ready to make some paint. But before we get too far, a little disclaimer: Gamboge is genuinely very toxic if you ingest it. And I would heavily discourage you from doing anything that I do in this video. This video is not a tutorial, it is more of a historical demonstration so that you don't have to wonder what Gamboge looks like as it's being made and as it's being painted with. If you do happen to handle historical pigments, especially toxic ones like Gamboge, please make sure that you have proper PPE, that's personal protective equipment, and make sure that you work in a highly ventilated area and you're not working around any vulnerable people or children or pets or anything like that. So without further ado, let's suit up and I'll talk to you a little bit about what Gamboge is and why it's such an unusual paint pigment. This is Gamboge. It's a naturally occurring resin that comes from a couple species of trees that primarily grow in Cambodia, which is where it originally came from and also where it got its name. Cambodia used to be called Gamboge in Latin. And the process of obtaining Gamboge is kind of like collecting maple syrup, but just imagine that instead of tree sap, you're collecting something that's more similar to latex, and instead of taking, you know, maybe overnight to drip into a bucket, you have to come back like a year later. It is collected and dried in bamboo, which is why it's in these characteristic little cylindrical shapes. Now, to make our paint, I've heard that they used to do it by grinding it on a traditional inkstone, which I actually brought one back from Korea for my husband, but it's for my husband. I don't want to like fill it with a bunch of like poop until you die pigment, but that's okay because the other way to make this into paint is just to smash it up and then transferred it to my mortar, and I ground it up until it looked like this. And then I just very carefully transferred it to my glass mulling plate. I added some walnut oil and I just started mulling the paint, which took 5 million flippin' years. Making oil paint is a really interesting process. Every pigment takes oil differently. You have some pigments that are called like thirsty pigments. They take a lot of oil. You have some don't absorb the oil as much, so they need very little oil. This pigment was just really freaking weird. It kind of like gummed up, maybe because it's a tree resin. It was not like any oil paint I have ever made in my entire life. And that's saying something. Anyway, I molded this pigment for like a bajillion years. It was only like 40 minutes, but still, that is such a long time. And I was left with this beautiful goo. Gamboge is weird color-wise. It has been described as the color of earwax, which is unfortunate, but it tints an incredibly bright, vivid yellow. And it's been used as a paint pigment for a ridiculously long time. Over 1,300 years, to be exact. Its first use we know of being in Japan in the 8th century. But it was also used all over Asia, including in Indian miniatures, perhaps as a substitute for the even stranger, somehow, Indian yellow. I don't really have time to get into that here, but if you would like to hear about how I accidentally took a big ol' whiff of arsenic, fully believing that it was cow piss, and why on earth I would do that, you can watch the video after you watch this one. Please don't leave. Anyway, it did eventually turn into a really, really pretty paint, and this paint eventually came to Europe and was used by a bunch of artists, including Rembrandt and that one botanist named Hooker. Also, see Indian Yellow video. The interesting thing is that it's not really talked about in art. It's not traced very much. In the few instances where they have tested paintings for Gamboge, it was used extremely extensively, especially in Asian art. Speaking of art, let's fast forward a little bit to talk about the painting that I'm going to be making with this stuff, and why I'm painting with Gamboge in the first place. Gamboge is rarely painted with anymore because it is something called a fugitive pigment, which basically means that it starts out a really beautiful bright yellow color, and it fades in the sunlight to look like essentially nothing. See this painting, which used to have a bunch of bright colors including yellow, and the yellow has now faded to nothing. That also means that 99% of the paints that you now see labeled as Gamboge are actually just artificial pigments, often like involving like azo or copper pigments. They just have labeled Gamboge. They are not real Gamboge. Real Gamboge like this is essentially not used in paints anymore, except for in things like religious painting that we'll talk about a bit later. Now, some people would argue that not just its toxicity, but also its complete lack of color fastness is a really strong reason not to paint with Gamboge. It kind of feels like all of the odds are stacked against me here. But I actually think that it's an excellent reason that I should, because it means that I can show you a painting that is highly historical but not really made anymore. And because this painting is so rare and special, I really wanted to plan it out super thoroughly before I made it. And so I decided to make an inspiration board on Milanote and kind of like dump all of my thoughts and research on there so I could figure out what felt right. Milanote was kind enough to sponsor this video. They are fantastic, so thank you, Milanote. They're a free app that you can use to plan out and organize all sorts of creative projects and ideas. Huge props to them. As a person with a ton of projects in the works at all times, I use them all the time and I absolutely love it. Milanote also has a mobile app that syncs up with the desktop version, so you can work on your projects whenever, wherever. And you can even edit boards together with friends or colleagues in real time, which makes group projects seem slightly less hellish. Also, peep the web clipper tool, super useful for organizing data. Milanote is available for free indefinitely, no time limit. So I really wanted to figure out what composition worked well with all of my thoughts on Gamboge and shamanism, so I made a mood board and literally threw like a ton of my visual references and inspiration in there. Milanote is also super cool because they do have a ton of templates that you can use to organize your thoughts and ideas, and they even let you insert things like audio recordings and links to different websites. Like, for me, I added in links to some of my favorite pages I discovered while doing research for this painting for quick reference, and I even made subboards to delve deeper into a couple of topics that we'll get into later in the video, like Obong Sek and the uses of Gamboge in traditional Korean shamanism. Anyway, with this painting, I wanted it to feel really grounded and confident, but also a little bit strange and off-putting at the same time, because as we'll get into, Gamboge was used for a lot of really important things in Korean shamanism, but there's still the whole poison thing that we have to contend with. And so with all of that, this is where I landed. So click the link in the description if you would like to check out Milanote for free for your next creative project. And now let's paint it, and we'll talk a little bit about how Gamboge has been used in Korean shamanism for over 1,000 years, and also how it kills you. Woo! So Gamboge is super important in a bunch of ancient spiritual practices called musok, which is also known as Korean shamanism. And it's part of a color system called Obongsek, which is essentially a 5-color system that colors are corresponding with different directions. So you have blue, east, red, south, yellow, center, white, west, and black, north. And one of the most popular pigments that was used for yellow was Gamboge. Now, I'll probably talk a little bit more about this 5-color system, Obongsek, in another video, but suffice it to say that yellow, as like the central color, is considered to be a strong connector between the human and the spiritual realm, bringing all sorts of balance, having a strong, like, grounding effect. It's also the color of royalty, like the emperors. It's the color that the shamans wear. It's used a lot in the paintings of the shamanic gods, and it's often used to highlight like the most revered figures in Korean shamanism. But perhaps most interesting is that yellow was also the chosen color for special shamanic amulets, known as bujok. You might have seen something similar if you've ever seen Naruto, or like any other anime where they use these kind of like evil repelling talismans, except for in Naruto they just literally explode. They were all inspired off of the ancient Chinese talismans, which then got passed down to both Korea and Japan, and in Korea they became bujok, which were these specialized paper talismans that were yellow, usually dyed with Gamboge, and they were printed on with red ink, these special messages that only shamans could understand that were meant to repel ghosts, because apparently yellow is the color that repels evil spirits. These talismans are also used for things like getting your crush to notice you, getting a big work promotion, stuff like that. But unfortunately, although they started out as this super bright yellow, like I said, because Gamboge is a fugitive pigment, it often fades into looking something more like this. But don't worry, the painting that I'm doing today has a lot of little tricks that I'm hoping, fingers crossed, keep it from fading quite as much as these ones did. One of these tricks is just that I am using a UV protectant varnish over it, and I will also be putting it behind UV protectant museum grade glass. The other thing is that the most fugitive pigment is watercolor made with Gamboge. This is oil paint. So because it's already in like a stronger, thicker binder, it has that additional protection against the sunlight. So hopefully it should last for at least a good couple of decades. We'll see though. Honestly, not a lot of people have painted with this recently, so we really can't tell for sure. This was the most difficult paint I have ever worked with in my entire life, and I made paint out of Coke Zero a couple of years ago, so that's really saying something. It legitimately felt almost exactly like I was painting with a sort of like thick, whipped honey. But the color is beautiful. If you would like to bid on this painting and support this channel, the eBay listing is linked below and it'll be up for the next week. And to those who bid on my last painting, thank you so much for the overwhelming support. It means the world to me that I get to do this for my real life actual job, and there is literally no exaggeration whatsoever when I say that I solidly believe that I have the best community here on YouTube. You guys are unreal. Hey, speaking of being real here, I know what you want. You stuck around till the end of the video, so you deserve to learn how Gamboge can make you quite literally shit yourself to death. You sick freaks. Well, your time has come because we're about to talk about Gamboge's medicinal uses. heavy air quotes there, and the horrifying consequences of ingesting it. Gamboge is a particularly violent version of something called a stimulant laxative, or sometimes a purgative. This basically means that ingesting even a tiny amount, it's gonna make you poop yourself like really, like a lot. It causes extreme gastrointestinal distress, including like violent bouts of diarrhea, crazy cramping, constant abdominal pain, and then a loss in potassium that is so severe that it can cause your heart to just stop working and then you die, because you literally go into cardiac arrest due to the fact that you pooped out all your potassium. The tricky thing is knowing exactly how much Gamboge is fatal. Now, it's been recorded in old apothecary books and stuff like that, that around 4 grams has been recorded to cause death. So that would be around like a teaspoon or 2 of Gamboge. That's horrifying for sure, but not nearly as scary as something like arsenic, where the fatal dose would be less than 1/10 of that. But it is still pretty darn toxic. In fact, in 1836, a British quack doctor, James Morrison, sold Morrison's vegetable pills, touted as a miraculous cure-all. Morrison was found guilty of manslaughter after his patient died because he advised him to take 35 pills of Gamboge. Over a dozen people died from these pills, and these pills contained, you guessed it, high concentrations of Gamboge. Unfortunately, in the year of our Lord, 2026, it is still sometimes used as a natural remedy. In historical texts, the dosage was usually around 2 to 6 grains. A grain, if I remember right, was around like 0.05 grams. Insanely small amount. People are still taking this as a natural remedy today, which is extremely problematic, and please don't do that. Why would you do that? I don't understand. In short, Gamboge isn't likely to immediately kill you, especially if you're just like touching it and you're not touching it in its powdered form. Holy crap, if it's in like its powdered form, really, please use PPE. But also, like, it's encouraged that you don't even spend like a prolonged amount of time smelling it, which is why I have taken the liberty to smell it for you and tell you that it smells like a mixture between kind of like a sweet curry powder and a little bit of like an acrid pine smell. Very resiny, a little spicy, undertones of cleaner. Also, I only did this when the pigment was already extremely securely bonded in the context of an oil paint. Don't huff Gamboge powder. Again, that's just a horrible idea. Honestly, don't do it when it's in its paint form either. That's also a horrible idea. I just did it anyway, because I prefer to live life on the edge. The edge of the toilet. But, no, that sucked. Now, I've mentioned this before, but Gamboge, the yellow, is actually only one of 5 colors in that Korean color system, obongsake. And surprise, surprise, all 4 of the other ones are also toxic. So if you'd like me to continue this series and talk about the rest of the Korean color family, comment and let me know which one you would like to see next. Blue, green, red, black, or white. And if you want to hear more about all things strange and deadly about art and art history, please subscribe. We would love to have you here. We take an appropriate amount of risk only, and we make sure to always follow all of the laws. Thanks again to Milanote. Thank you so much to all of my incredible patrons. I love you. You're the best. And thanks to you for watching this video. As always, don't die, and I will see you next time. Bye.